Alright, 당은 내 녀모바 개원 기본 기록제야 당은 녀모바 방고바 인자 녀모바 방해야 된다. 저기 전시신 대제 기디네다. 샘디 녀모바 쇼스 마땅하디다. 기디네디 제거하디 샘 기회 쇼스 당지 녀모 쇼스 마땅하디. 난 기디네디 냠레 제거하디. 디레스 데네자 당은 데리야 샘디 녀모바 쇼스 마땅하지 샘 미냠바 송하시디. 샘디 기회 초래 냠제 아니 녀모가 쇼서 좋아들 송고리 해서지 대송고로 대자디 송하들 그 생각도 돌뒤네 담보 송야들 가르쳐 쓰네 저기다 지게 아주 담보 자와 가르치는 소수기 셈리야 파도시네 지게 받다 셈리한 다에도 안 셈리야 녀모바 기유디 민도 도시네 대샤 콘로라서 그 녀모바 기유바나 안된바 하고 봐이나 되게 현시시이다 되게 하고 연도 안 된비기 신제네 데리안 류셈디 녀모버셔서 마땅하지 아니 류교 직파서 줘야다 아니 나게 계시야라서 받쳐서 맞이바지 도시네 어디 셈 직 녀모버셔서 마다 셈디 녀모셔서 마땅하지 아니 류기 자와다 나게 류기 자와다 나게지 자와 가야 미제바지 도시네 아니 지금 샘 기회 초 개와이나 되니 기회 초서 류기 류하게 자와 제바도 두스 제 제오래 해서지 그 생각도 이거를 수 돌려진 뒤에서 뒤슈거래.
Good evening. So all of us, longing to be happy and free of suffering, we need to focus on abandoning the afflictions, the very source of all suffering, pain, and misery. And the way to do it, as Shantideva is presenting so clearly here, is to rely on the two, mindfulness and vigilance. The way to keep the mind freed of the afflictions is through relying on vigilance, ensuring that the mind remains virtuous. In other words, a way of thinking is always virtuous and thereby free of the afflictions. Vigilance is thereby tasked with always guarding the mind, watching the mind, ensuring that it is on the side of virtuous ways of thinking and separated apart from afflicted ways of thinking. So last week in brief, we looked at how this needs to be done at all times. The watching of the mind to ensure that it is unafflicted needs to be done at all times in all circumstances. So whether we are alone or with others, whether we are still or whether we are moving about, whether we are quiet or in conversation, always watching our mind. And before embarking on any movement or saying something, watch our mind. Be aware of our motivation and ensure our mind remains free of the afflictions.
자와 두제야데 군노 셈게 근데 지게 군내 라제 디 군롱기 제소 주제 알륜하게 자와 남바제 디버사야 되는 중고로 봐 진짜 개와사야 돼야 담보 셈군롱 개와삼나 개위 삼나다 개위 삼나 디 제소라제 륜하게 내 개와사 중고로 되네 자다는 조 셈리야 두친 담보 자와 줘야다 되어봐다 그래 중에 담보 군노라 셈데 군노라 다고래 해서지 디셔와 난 그진데 돌도 쉬바래 다 되는 마 지금 예바로 됐을 때 계시로 쓴 거래.
In Buddhism, the focus is on keeping the mind virtuous, keeping the mind unafflicted. Because if one's mind, through relying on vigilance and mindfulness, is unafflicted, is virtuous, then the resulting or the following a verbal communication or physical action will be virtuous. So hence the focus is on watching the mind, taking care of our motivation, and doing so at all times, not just in formal religious settings such as this, but at all times. So last week we looked at this point in an abbreviated manner. Now Shantideva presents it in a more expansive manner.
강체 랑기 2차 가사 강체 랑 2차 바당 초벌 뒤바 디세 예수 미자 마미자 신신도네 내버려자스.
come to the 48th verse in the 5th chapter. Whenever there is attachment in your mind, whenever your mind is drawn toward anger, do not act, do not speak, rather remain like a log.
다 강세 랑게 2차 파시다 저기 당아 뒤 관계체 뒤기디 나다 뒤 관계체 안에 랑게 1 파다연도 소심리아 그 댕기면도 스투신 베네 되어바이나다 드로바이나다 당아 저기 데니게 레가로 쉐바이나다 제비 갑라다 두신한 저기 셈을 파다바이나 그 데니게 땅이도 뒤 관계체 스티네 따비 뒤수 다 랑게 셈리아 랑 2차 와다 세도 랑게 셈디 랑기 안데지 가소레 랑기 가위 조보다 랑기 년이 쳐라 차바기야라 소바 데네 차바기야다 데네 양 균으로 론셔라 소바 차바기 되바 여바 차바기 여바나 하고나 기기 여바나 데네게 셈 따고 시신이 바 제요도 다 셈려야 다 랑기 야네 랑기 조보라 차바 랑기 년라 차바기야다 야나 규자라 균월이야 차바기 되바이나 데네 안에 디오 인생이 자야래 예수미자 마미자 신신도네 내버자 세데 제사 데네기 차바기 되바이나 안에 남사 오다 지게 류기 자와 가야마 지겨 말해서지 안에 예수미 류기 자와 가야마 제바지 파주 좋아도 요 마제바 안에 양하기 끼시 가야마 셔바지 두세네 두스되고래서 제사 신신도네 내버자진 신세대 지나 신 당아도 신 동보로 마 제살가 제샤바 동보로 신로 신다 다가 신디 겐신기 바마진 고도 샤선 그런 구교 단제 구교가 다셔 말와 땡 말와 디나신 당아 주기 랑게 셈려야 차바 제려바 있나 차바 셈디 차바 원게 마땅와지 차바 원게 땅바나 안 류게 자와 미다 제 류게 자와지 안디게 노트셔야다 아니 나게 자와지네 angaki jik tamara sheyala soba digi diba lungaki diba saya chagurwa dine za semdi dine ge chawe ondo matangwa je dine lungaki jawa kaya mi cheba je shin na shin jen dyogore esa chi sumduwa.
The first line, whenever there is attachment in your mind. The first word then, whenever, ties to what we looked at last week, whereas the previous verse also started with the word whenever. So in other words, at all times. But we can take it further, and not just if it means at all times, it means no matter who you're with, where you are, what you are doing, whether you're stationary, whether you're moving around alone or with others, whatever you may be doing, that's the whenever. Watch your mind. So that's what we looked at in a brief last week. Now they are saying, watch your mind. Oh, now Shantideva is saying, watch your mind for attachment in particular. So attachment arises so easily for us. But if we think of general groups to which we can be on guard for attachment arising, we can think of those who are loved ones, our family members, as well as our friends, and also the groups that we identify with. So towards such people, attachment readily arises, or favoring these people, these groups, over others. And attachment also arises so easily towards material things, possessions, wealth, and so forth, but also to things such as one's opinions, one's views. So attachment arises so easily. We need to be guarding our mind or watching our mind for the potential arisal of attachment. And when it does, the third line, do not act, do not speak. So when we notice, when our vigilance notices the presence of attachment in any form, do not respond. Do not let it influence your speech, rather stay silent. Do not let it influence your behavior, rather remain still. The fourth line, remain like a log. A log is used here and will be used in a number of verses, and this refers to a strong and sturdy tree that is lying, that's fallen over, and is lying in a way like immovable, difficult to move. So here the idea is, just like something strong and sturdy like that, we should not follow the afflictions when they arise. When we are aware of the arisal of attachment, there's no need that we have to follow it. We should rather remain unmoved, like a fallen tree, like a log.
That is one trouble to about these that you want that in a rangla rang the rang chola down the shen chola down what you are shen you rangi that you meet him bada rangi dawa meet him bala so but the negi deli ano conto kia la so bada dela and the jig meet you big number kia then beneaji ngobola so bala meet you number kia conto kia unguru what in the corner the negi all those in a Bendigo tour to but in a kigubana, the negata assembly, Shimju, Rangi assembly, Rangi, Rala, Tawa Midume, Shelia, and Toa, the Miduba, congregated by Ina, then assembly and Dido chose Matanwache, do you want to Matanwache, then the Lunagi, Jawa Kayan Mechebache, and Chi, Lugu, Jawa Mechebata, and the Mashebache, Lucian, part Shinshin, Shina Shinja, do or SS Mundua. That the rang said matter. That the rang said matter. The she the rang said that Troy Shen or the Shen Troy Rangli Rangi Tawa Randa Tawa Matumba Shen Lian Troy that indicate.
The second line, whenever your mind is drawn toward anger. So here too, vigilance being on guard, whenever it notices the risal of anger, whether it is towards what someone is saying, or what they are doing, or what they are preventing you from doing, whether it's about their views and opinions, or something else. Whatever the cause or the source of one's anger may be, the third and fourth line, do not act, do not speak, rather remain like a log.
The nigger chose you de the mida rana meeting at Tawame me Yunguri, Simja Yungurua, and then Chiki the nigger the Membeda, Sishin La Sobada, Yon Sigurava, and the Jikanglia Chabaki say you did a rangi, and the Yenda rangi gave you draw, and the Rangi that Simja Dundula Soba Yungurua rangi died, Dawaje Simja that the nigger, and then Gunor Jalala Soba the Yungurua, just like the nigger Dondala, that rangi. 강 유라 차와 소소를 제바 셈나 따도 유신지래 차바게 되어 있나 아니 양지게 셈디 차바디 원도 나교 말레스 차바디 원도 땅나 안 차바디 원도 땅진데 ben에 잘라로 차바 있나 차바디 원도 땅진데 잘라디 되ኋ라 셈네 슈처게 되니 류게 자와 안디라야게 탑시시야 당하고 거네디 네직 준시에 고거다 유유제라야라 소바 Lujukonen, Troyala, so Kumakuya, so bada, and the nigger you see what the nigger. And then on to Shenyomaza, the same day, Chabi want to Madawache, and Lungagi Javati, Chabi want to Madawache, to Shinshin the Neores, and the Shelia, Metawa, and Troy, some of Giri Bana, Yan some of the Troy, do you want to Madawache, and Lamza, and to Shene, Lungagi Javat, and Machevache, Kosh.
Afflictions such as attachment and anger, they arise with all too little stimulation, and they can arise in relation to a broad number of things, fellow humans, animals, or inanimate things. All can be a source of the risal of our afflictions. What the source is not that important. What is important is that firstly, vigilance is aware, is on guard, and secondly, that we then follow the guidance that vigilance and mindfulness imparts, which is, do not allow the afflictions, whether attachment or anger, to influence you. Not allow it to be expressed through one's physical behavior or one's speech. And whilst it may well have arisen, do not allow it to dominate your mind, going around again and again, desire for something or aggression towards someone, dominating one's way of thinking ever more. Because from this, negativity will follow. It will follow certainly if it's expressed through one's speech or behavior, but if it's allowed to dominate one's mind, one becomes more habituated to this way of thinking and becomes ever more likely to express it. So therefore, one should rather not allow these afflictions to influence our physical or verbal behavior.
저게 삼나올야 가르치기도 민도 심지에도 차바기야 라서바다 콘로기와 라서바 되네게 시신게 하고요도 한 잼비기 에 잼버텐제다 될 존나 될야 님보 남산 님보 땡 고미야 라서바다 되는 베네 어다 차바기 기여도 될야 님보 땡 남산 아니 지게 미다바 유이텔에 미다바 삼다 미다고 고미야 안에 유이텔에 미시 미두바 고미야 라서바도 쳬베네 차바디 시야로 차고로와 아니 존나 다음에 받아서 고미야 다음에 뱉다고 고미야 되네 미다바 고미야 되네 아니 유이텔에 미네 아니 가서래 어데치 미두바 고미야 이나 제 차바의 님보로 시야 차고 차바 시로 차고로 안 되네게 인디나시 다 콘도를 기여돼 다 콘도 기바 전시 시신이 콘도 기바 하고나 다 콘도 기바다 콘도 기서를 선배 되네게 하고도 남산 템베 된제네 되네 이 유이델이야 아니 니시 고미야다 잠제 고미야로서 좀에나 콘도기 님보를 직 차르고와 아니 누치네 삼다도나 아니 야지게 될이야 안지게 되네게 고마도 있는데 옥중으로 검제도 오신 여바이나 콘도디 시로로 제가 도시는 년보 된도나 잼비게 남사 될이야 하고 제 년보 된가디 계시 못 차고와 되네 셈디 개비 개와디 온 교대로
At all times, or whenever, so at all times, be on guard, watching your mind with vigilance. And when vigilance notices an affliction starting to arise, mindfulness then immediately recognizes the danger that this poses, and in dependence on your many years of receiving teachings and reflecting on that, will recall the antidotes to apply. So if you have heard many teachings and reflected well on those teachings, those antidotes will come to mind quickly. And because of your meditations, you'll be able to apply them skillfully. So for example, when vigilance notices attachment arising, you can draw from any number of antidotes that you have cultivated. You can, for example, think of impermanence, recognizing that this object that you desire is changing in every moment, and therefore following that, looking for lasting happiness from something that is changing momentarily will never lead to satisfaction, or something that's changing momentarily can never lead to lasting happiness. The second antidote is to remind yourself of the faults of what you're desiring, recognizing that it cannot fulfill your needs because of these various faults that it also has, because attachment has exaggerated those good qualities. Or by reminding yourself from your meditations on reality, on emptiness, that whatever your attachment is arising towards does not exist in the way that it appears, and therefore too it cannot lead to lasting happiness. And if vigilance, on the other hand, notices the risal of anger, there vigilance really needs to catch the risal of anger when it's still just starting to arise, long before the mind is dominated. Then mindfulness can recall the antidotes, whether love or compassion, and in this way, immediately you can calm your mind. Or if you are more practiced in, say, calming your mind through watching your breath, then turn your mind to focus on your breath. Take several deeper breaths, calm your mind. So in this way, vigilance and mindfulness work together as a team. Vigilance needs to always be on guard, because then mindfulness is going to be able to be activated when the affliction is still in its infancy and can apply their antidotes successfully.
안다디 소소기 뉴바다 데네게 바베기 딘데 고미아로 시용 년보때 두 삼담에나 제가 셈디 개화를 니두고라 제가다 소소리 뇨모기에도 되샤 콘로 기에나 디원도 마다와 제데네 셈디 템바 텐제 개위 초소 샤양도다 개화 냠바 셈디 네 개위 냠바 녀초 냠바를 송화 차거와 데네게다 삼르가야 지게 데네가 고므로지 데네지 마두바이나 데네게다 소소기 뇨모기에도 콘로 기 하고 요도다 년보 고므로지 개마다는 가야 마삼바제다 잠니로 직 되셔바나 고 이 셈디죠 스토마다 신신 내바라 차 신신도 내바사 차고다 고 가야 마삼바제 고 즉도 신의 직도 샤sem 그런 게다 셈 그런 야도 진 지 삼라 직디 또 샤샤베는데 가야 삼는 가야 마다마 또 샤샤베는데 곧 나홈으로 지치는 가슴질이야 곧 콩으로다 되셔야 시루로와 이제 곧 예수 수기 류게 자와 가야 맞아 나이가 자와 삼나 가야 마다마치 되셔 또 되베는데 바 자와데 시루야게 마시루로와다 이네 자다 도신의 신신도 내가 샤세야 돼 책으로와
This is how the two, vigilance and mindfulness, work together to keep your mind virtuous. Because despite one's best efforts, afflictions, due to our strong and lengthy habituation to them, will continue to arise. But as long as one doesn't tire from relying on vigilance and mindfulness, when the afflictions arise, you can deal with them. Because as long as you have vigilance noticing them arising, then you can deal with them, because they are not too strong yet. And if through your years of hearing teachings and reflecting on them, mindfulness has sufficient strength to recall the faults of the afflictions, that they are not to be entertained, that they are not justified, and mindfulness has the strength and skill to apply the antidotes, then the afflictions, as they start to arise, will be noticed by vigilance, and mindfulness will apply the antidotes, and they will be overcome. This means that whilst the afflictions will still arise, we'll see things which we desire, and attachment arises. We'll see or hear things we dislike, and aversion will arise. But we'll be breaking our habituation to them, because we'll be challenging the arisal of the afflictions. And we'll prevent them from gaining dominance in our mind, going around and around, our anger growing ever more intense, our detachment for something overwhelming us. We'll be preventing that from happening, because as the affliction arises, we deal with it, and we deal with it skillfully. So here we start to see how we weaken and eventually will break our habituation to the afflictions. And we do so by strengthening our habituation to wholesome, virtuous ways of thinking. And those are often expressed as the various antidotes, the antidotes to our afflictions. So as our habituation to the antidotes grow, their opposing, or contrary rather, their contrary afflictions will weaken. And this is how we start to radically change who we are, the kind of person we are. We become someone much more dominated by wholesome, virtuous ways of thinking.
So the jian yila ma chi ba se jian ga sam ma da wa jian sin jian de ne ge nyomo be tue jia kong ro nyomo bo on de dang wa le da jian yila ma chi ba ju du ga ma sam ba tue xie ba ne du nyo tue jia kong ro ge on de song jie ni di ba sa de yong ma ro jian yila ma chi ba se yo ro ya a ju ge tue xia da kong ro jian yu 다 되셔 공로 있게는 디 왕도 땅 내가 전에 디버사기로와 지양 가야 삼마다시 두신 지양 삼마다시 되려면은 디 되셔 공로기 왕촌 내가 두야 쳐 말봐 디버사기 말봐 제자데 디버사월에 근데 가야 마삼지 지양 힐라마지 되는 캡산체도 하지 거라 안테로와지 다 간지는 또 대시셔야 될第牛毛界的机会吧，谢谢好公有整个电解念波大面包公面、米大包公面、米度包公面，安几个整个的控制念波，咱们研究公面，安在对下当控制一个个都是念波提出公面马图为呢，但这个五中国的面积都小五中国公面的都是，那点呢，提出讲的那个马这个马图为呢，刚样上马当些都是对下为呢。So
if one trains one's mind well in calming it through a concentration practice such as watching the breath, and this way subduing the mind, if one's mind then becomes very focused on, for example, watching the breath, then the afflictions are not going to arise. Why? You're not thinking about anything. You're just aware of the arisal and passing, the process of breathing in and breathing out. That's what's absorbed your mind. So your mind's not going here and there and thinking about a variety of things, and therefore the afflictions are not being stimulated.
denige nyembo dem shijin ha kono ya dembi ge nyembo denje ba dimya so tablam da ding anzul dos kale hawo ro lamsa ko de ge ne dige lamsa ji ji lamsa ji lyunga ge jawa di ba je shor ro ro cha ba ge na re kono gen anzul dos kale ji lamsa di nyembo dembi ge nyembo den go ba da ha go tu ya de kale kale ha bo re ha go ne den tu ye ge kale ha bo cha de ro ba se sa de ko ba me ro jine za da nga zo nga sa sa ne nga zo 차다 맞게 녀래는 아주 넘윤데 되네시는 어디네게 다다고치 차고 깨봐지 하고서나 다 녀래 차밤 유 저게 유변절라 차베게 차고 깨서나 가르쳐 오래서는 남사 안디 녀버된 그 시진하고 남사 템비 녀버된 두바시 고래 녀버 갈땐 거라선다 유들라 미비게 미다바 느끼지기지 지비게 녀보면봐 도시 삼다 고미하다 다음에 봐 또 다신 집에 채나 가에 예 도시 동반이도 공부를 도시는 삼당고래 해야다 안 디마죠나 기지기지 집이 미다 버려서 삼다야 돼 니야 삼다마도나 다 유딜레미니 미두바도 고미하라서 되는 공부고래서 나 되네게 마도나 되도 우중을 미지 우중을 검지도 우친되나 곧 이루래 세네 도시님 버티네 땡고그래서 다 되네하고 마도나 가야 삼마다 아직 도신 되도가 지긴다 생각이 당어도 도신 가상산에 지금 녀모데 맞게 녀래나 도신의 녀께서는 삼 디당기나 디지긴 생각이다 지금 저게 제일 마소나 도신의 안에 야도 어제 디삼다제 제리지하고 있어요. 근데 코로케나 다시한테 당화를 어디다 당화기는 코로케나 야고 말지 왕도 따베네 되네 류하게 줘봐디 두자신에 샬라 녀체시에 됨 되네 디바모가 야고 말씀 괜다 되네게다 되네 코로케와 하고서나 기기 여바다 기 하고선 어디다 되네게 녀버들 남사 야 유텔에 미비에 잠바다 저와 인지 공부를 생비 두 삼다다 한 되네 공부도 받나 되네 울미비 우중 검제도 스티기나 생비 삼다 디아마던다 가야 삼마다지 되긴 생비 두시는 것도 세월에 생비게 마산산 두시는 데니진의 디제고를 생비게다 나중에 두시는 야네 야도 삼다베나 나 데니게 야지 소식이라 콘르기와다 되셔기와 하고 있는데 남서 오다디 템비게 디제고를 생비게 템비게 대여야다 데니 대여된 바두신 제투야게 되켜봐 용으로 하다 간도 되었잖아요. 얘네는 간도라 되스 장도를 시작하고 계시 뭐 차고래. 장도를 제바 있는다 마음바나 되네게 소수규나 녀모지 하고 해도 어디니 뭐디 된투야게다 개발된다 용으로 와.
Whilst such benefits can come through training the mind to be calm through, for example, reflecting on one's breath, the long-term benefits are very, very limited. Whereas the approach that is presented by great masters such as Shantideva is actually to keep the mind active. Because as we go through our day, we need to have an active mind to engage in various activities, and our mind needs to be able to cope with itself, cope with the mind as it is busy going through activities. So what one is encouraged to do is to spend time coming to know the Dharma well, gathering knowledge and integrating that knowledge. And part of that process involves keeping yourself concentrated whilst you're doing so. This is training in mindfulness and vigilance. Vigilance being aware of distraction, mindfulness bringing the mind back to whatever it is, or the teaching you're hearing, the book you're reading, or the meditation topic. In this way, one starts to develop one's mindfulness and vigilance, being aware of what one is trying to engage in and not allowing one's mind to be too distracted. And by training in this way, and also gathering knowledge of Dharma topics and deepening that knowledge of the Dharma topics through one's own reflection, then one is developing one's mindfulness and vigilance throughout all these processes. And then this aids one in keeping one's mind unafflicted when going about one's various activities. Because the process of learning about the Dharma isn't merely a gathering of knowledge and understanding it well, but it involves seeing how it applies to yourself. Coming to recognize, as the teachings present, that the afflictions only ever cause harm, and they are to be avoided at all costs until the point when they are finally abandoned. So gaining conviction through seeing how the afflictions only cause harm. Through this, you'll encourage yourself to look out for, so when is it that my afflictions arise? What do I encounter that stimulates the rise of the afflictions? Then based on this further knowledge, you'll know when it's of particular importance to guard your mind. So you rely then on vigilance and mindfulness, knowing you're going into a situation of potential danger from the afflictions arising. And this is very helpful to follow this approach, because it is difficult to watch our mind at all times. This takes extensive training. But in this period of training, by engaging in the Dharma with mindfulness and vigilance, developing our habituation in this way, and being aware of those particular times we need to be on a particular guard, this will help. This will help. Then also, in this process of engaging in the Dharma, of studying and reflecting, you'll be meditating on a number of topics, such as the dissatisfactory nature of samsara, the lack of how what we desire cannot lead to happiness. And when we look at the things that we desire, we see actually then there's nothing there that really is that desirable. They have many faults as well. And we see how attachment exaggerates the good qualities of something. Also reflecting on emptiness, which serves to dissipate any potential arising of attachment. So by gaining skill in meditation topics such as this, then when at other times vigilance notices an affliction arise, mindfulness can call on your prior meditation. Then you have strong antidotes that you can apply, recognizing that what it is that you desire cannot lead to lasting happiness, recognizing that what's annoying you has no essence at all. It has no way actually to harm you. It doesn't exist from its own side, and one can let go of it. So going through this process of studying and reflecting, strengthening your mindfulness and vigilance, gaining ever more Dharma knowledge, and getting to know yourself better means that your mindfulness and vigilance grow in strength, and your capacity to apply antidotes also grows in strength. The 49th verse. If overly excited, wanting to mock or laugh derisively, proud, haughty, or conceited, or wishing to expose the weakness of others, if cunning or thinking to deceive, or
Digi Chabangone remember Chabaki say Yulpa, same yen, Chabaki Yulpa, same did some diada. Then Conducus a Yudi Delia, some Davada, some Dani died the Guevaros check Guevasivore. The new Guevasi. The nigger Sosuga, some Nalia, the Antic Jebachi, Dinia, Chadan, Yulia, Miche, same the Antibaina, and Dushin, the Hako Yondu, Delia, Tempatinge, Antic. Lungagi Jawadi di choso matangwaje and sem the lunga Jawadi choso matangwaje and the jik doshin matangwaje due to Gores, the Shina Shinjin due to Gores as Sungore. The Shinjin do never just a Tibetan Chasada doshin that were doshin that's Ganjele di choso di wando tangji sem di wando tangji lunga ge jawa jigyo mares she's not jawa mache ba ju dyo res orda.
The first term, overly excited, or just usually translated as excitement, So excitement, or being overly excited, refers to the mind being drawn again and again to objects of either attachment or anger, where these objects dominate one's mind. So when one's mind keeps getting drawn back to thinking about what someone said or did, or thinking about something you really want, this is the mind of excitement. So when vigilance notices that our mind is being dominated, overwhelmed by an object of attachment or anger, then mindfulness needs to come into place, reminding ourselves that these afflictions are just a path to suffering. And then what you'll see at the end of the next verse, the 50th verse, then one should rather remain like a log. In other words, withdraw one's mind from this way of thinking and rather rest again, turn it back to virtue, rest with virtue, not allow your mind to be drawn away, overly excited by objects of attachment or aversion.
And di Geshe cheba, Geshe said the Shenlia near Kurche, and it's because a Gemelon, Milia, Chele Capche, Gemelon at your or di some notice. Jazan Denigi, Shenlia, Chele Capche, Sosugi, Shenlia, Jetta Jig, and Gemelon, Chele, Gemelon at Dondalia, Chele Capchuski, Gemelon, Loya, some not Yuvena, and di some not did that, some not you. 越把好说那准备点些咱们上sem的地说说马当话这地都些呢马当话这的旅客给加话的地说说马送话这内头把这我的事情
If overly excited, wanting to mock or laugh derisively, mock or laugh derisively, this refers to when one is taking pleasure in the hardship that others are experiencing, or could be expressed as or understood as talking badly about someone or to someone, and often as taking pleasure in the problems of others, or the problems of those that we dislike. This too is to be refrained from when this wishing to engage or to talk in this way arises. One should refrain from this.
yang ngaje kalde ngaje jaden bas jisa da ngaje je da jaba je se de ngaje se de da shen ji le mi je ko le nga yun den che ye ko le nga ani ji bian jiao ma chen che ye se bi de ani ko le nga zha ge se bi du xin shen le mi je so su ge da sem kai we na ma chen ko le nga ya ge se bi de ne ge sam da je jaba ngaje je da jaba se de dan rang ge chue le sam da je o da rang ge nga yun de ya wu yu ngai de ben ko le nga ya ge sim be de ji ge nga an su bu pe ya wu yu sim be ge so su ge su bu la mi chen ne ko le nga ya ge sim be du chen nga ye ge rang gi yun de da yang gi an lu gi de ji ge de da da rang gi lu gi da ji ge zhe xue la so ba sam da je de la mi che de ne so so nga ye ge so so sim kan wa ge wa ne de la ya hua si go le de da ngaja se de shen ji le mi che o ko le shen ji lo ko yun den den shi ma do ko le nga ya ge sim be sam da kan wa ge wa na ko da de ko le ko de da ji zhe mo na ya wo zhe tu mo ne ko le nga ya zhe tu ge sim be shen ji le mi di to ne so so ya ga mo kan be nga ye sam da de nga ya se wo ji na da don da sim kan ba ji ba re de mi yu di nga ye se di mix de dang bo shen ji le mi che de so so rang lo ya kan ba de li go le dan gyakwa sayadi rangi yunde rangi chöchile miche an sosuki sem kyangpa de ligore jezada dini gileba na di ngaya se gyakwa ngaya da gyakwa se jezada samlo nangla dini shili yoba na jezada sheshinge daje dini ki sosuki samlo nangla dini shili yoba na namsa di samlo di wanto daje na semdi di wanto dang yomare dang matawache lunga ki di wanto semdi di wanto dang ma na and lunga ge jawa de di want to da lunga jawa number che sure che za de ne za sem di want to ma da wa lunga ge jawa ga ya ma che ba di want to da jawa ma che ba chi xin na che de wo de sa sung wo.
The second line, proud, haughty, or conceited. So these three terms are really very similar. The difference between them would be pride arises in through when we see someone else and we think that I am better than them. So we first see someone else and think in whatever aspect may be, their knowledge, their looks, their material possessions, we see them and we think we are better than them. Whereas pride, being haughty or conceited is in the other direction. One just thinks, I'm so good and I'm better than that person. So it's just the sequence, whereas pride arises in relation to someone else first. You say, oh, that person is worse than me, I am better than them. And where it's haughty and conceited, I'm so great, look at that one, not nearly as great as me. And this can be in relation to anything, to particular characteristics of oneself and so forth. And all too often involves an exaggeration on our part and a deprecation on their part too. So when vigilance notices afflictions such as pride or haughtiness arising, it should immediately call to mind mindfulness to recognize these are harmful, these are afflictions, and we should then remain like a log. In other words, if we should not talk under the influence of these minds, but rather stay silent. We certainly should not physically act under the influence of these minds, but rather remain still.
제가 되니기 나게게도 저기 셴라 그냥 저기다 저기 라마다 되니기 최적인 있는 셴레 90지 900개다 근데 직지제다 미 야보중은 제레게 기지수 일어나지 셴레 90제다 셴기 인기위 셴기 내가 야고 제바들이야 제수 일어나지 바이나 땡아게게디 용거 말 땡아게게 도시네 용거 말 제자당 안주기 셴레 90메제바데 셴기 제바들 제수 일어나지도 소수게 어다 거에데 되네시 당할 이야기를 내디 네 이야기를 선배다 지금까지 취재하나라다 거의 검시랑 검시고 자기에서 나 이야기를 선바다 안는 지금 알로좀 휴직 빼제만 나 이야기를 선배다 아주 나제제다 되네기 내 이야기 내가 친구 공로하다 근데 잡아다 나 얘기해야 돼 되네자 될이야 셴레 90제다 아니 셴레 인 기위님은 제가 생기 두신 내가 야보 제가들 제수 일한 제가 있나 다디 나야 이거 나야기 님보로 차고 내가
Skillful antidote to training in here is to rejoice in the good qualities of others. So as soon as you notice a mind of pride arising, for example, you're in a situation around your teacher and you're showing devotion, and you think to yourself, oh, I'm so devoted. And then you may think, compared to that lot of inferior people, you're really not so devoted. Then your vigilance notices the arisal of pride, and immediately, if you have trained, you'll stop yourself through knowing that this is an affliction and remind yourself of the qualities of the people you're just criticizing. Or the converse, if it's haughtiness that arises, you see others in the same situation, and you think, oh, that they're not really showing their devotion, unlike me. Then again, remind yourself of their qualities, rejoice in their good qualities. So this is just one illustration, but these afflictions arise in any number of ways. But the antidote, when you see your mind looking at faults of others, of criticizing others, is very first part is not to express this, but immediately to apply the antidote of seeking out their good qualities and having your mind turn to those, rejoicing in their good qualities.
되네 나 창조의 삼바당시 창조의 세대다 현기 균오바 현례 균주 제바시다디 균제 진도신의 제바나다 창조와서 되네기 현례 균제 제다 고현기 균 고래 균되네 여러 거든데 여러세 파 되네기 시에기 균 현기 균 시에기 창조에게 삼로를 여바나 어두신 삼로디 지수단지 룡하게 자와 미제바제 어두신의 료호레 지교 말에서 지단 되네기 창조의 삼로디 디제소 다제 샤바나 단 창조의 마마 친제 챤야 안도신 균제 먹부치는 되네기 안지게 디버사 용으로 랑이 마기와 챤야 마기와 라시니가라 강아제 용으로 되네 자디 지교 말에서 되네기 삼로다 템베기다 시신이 되네기 삼로 코스 지교 바데 유사의 삼로 되네 지야기 삼로 코우도 선배 삼로지 하고서는 대비 대행제람사 내가 저 삼로의 뒤쳐서 마다하지 안들 융하게 잡아 디원다 잡아면 제가 되고 해서
Third line, wishing to expose the weaknesses of others. So this too is a way of thinking that may well follow from seeing the mind that is criticizing others, finding faults and criticizing them. Then this may well be expressed wanting to tell others about the faults of someone. As soon as vigilance notices this, you need to refrain from this. Mindfulness reminding yourself that this person isn't pervaded by these faults. They have other good qualities. Rather praise their good qualities. And you can do so to yourself. But importantly, refrain from criticizing them or talking about their faults to others or exposing their weaknesses. Even if they do have these faults, remind yourself of their good qualities. Make your mind positive. Do not dwell on the faults of others.
나 갈대 교진 루심 삼세 교진 세디 나 초미시 바세지 초미시 바세 초시메 바세지 초미시 바서 세고도 되네 송도 초미시 바 베네 미션다지 소소리아지 진바로지 제베는 지 제바들에 드누 초마신 디네 드누 딜레마라고 쓰면 초미시 바로 봐. 저게 지단에 저게 되니지 초반에 지나 소수기 톱다 지어 봐지 톱다 베네 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 무이네 야담을 톱다 요반 드누 딜레마 잘라 주종 이슈고 쓰면 초미시 바로 봐. 지자 당한 줄에 되니기 토네당 강아 먹을리거라 초미시 봐. 지자다 저게 고소리선 뒤에다 차산되는 용거로 봐. 근데 지게 아주기 되니 초미시 봐. 교진 초미시 봐. 초미시 봐자다 초미시 봐 개봐나 초미시 봐 디기 왕게다 양자 라야기 되발라 같이 그랬으네. 되니 유유차 야 유유탑이래지 유유 여다 유유탑이래서 유유체는 투 라야기 베스 탑시단 거로 와다 제사 교진 루심스 교진스네 유 일로 초미시 봐지 초미시 봐지네 되니 디가리아 유유체 디라야기 된다 유유체 삼놓고 그래서 제사 되니게 소소리아 유텔이야 초미시밤 되니게 소수기를 유 디라야기 된다 유유 네 유유가 삼로 유여바 코고여바 하고나 시신 따제 되나 하고 봐야나 제사다 셈데 디원도 마다와주 룡하게 자와 미제바 되고 그래서 순거래 교진 루심 삼스 갈리 교진 루심 삼스 갈리 교진 루심 삼 제사 교진스네 초미시바지 루심 세디 여다 유 되네 삼로 디도네 안도시네 용그리에서
The final line, if cunning or thinking to deceive, these are two quite similar, but in either regard, if you notice the mind of being cunning, in other words, using perhaps the skills at your disposal or the power at your disposal to try and get more from someone, perhaps more money, etc., we need to recognize that this is a deceptive form of behavior. It is not appropriate, and we need to refrain. We need to be like a log. Because being cunning, despite it being so, all too often being praised in society, leading to success, we need to recognize that it involves taking advantage of others, getting more from others than they perhaps were comfortable in giving. And it leads to so many problems, for example, to corruption. So we need to ensure that our mind does not, that such a mind is not allowed to influence our speech or our physical behavior and needs to be dispelled through antidotes. And so too, if we notice the wish to deceive others, if this arises, if the wish to deceive others, if that arises, we need to refrain, recognizing that this is not the kind of person that we aspire to be, and it is not justified to take advantage of others in this way.
이자 나 초미셰바 정한주 칼라사야들의 연구로 왔지 칼라 신부르시네 대체치 마사바지 신부들 때 딜레마 상임 퇴제 다지 마마 딜레마 생임 되게 되니 사야 마타는 해야 되는 거 봐서 얘네기 나 지당을 지금 튕기엔다 되니기 다 되니려 가서래 촉셰체고래 해서 나야 촉셰스는 디그리스 되니 당심라네 디그리 둘로이네 되니 또 당심라네 디그리 스펜 사야 동야리 안디게 저기 튕기에 가려나 직sem라 당심라네 디그리 삼바지 당한 소유 튕기 디그리 삼비게다 디 촉셰고래스 다디 가제라나 디양 알고 디양 거야 제네 초심에 봐진 데네 파 삼로디 가샤샤 가제고 어찌 고우스 딜레마 거서 데네 용어로 가서 벤절라 초심에 봐 원실라 초심에 원시 권이자 딜레가 딜레오 로직라는 로니 메싱 거든 데네 롱안에 로 주지 거든 데네기 디게 데네 용어로 봐데 제사 데네게 다 원치 돈에 초심에 봐 매바다 유자라 사야 돌아 초심에 봐 상기랑이라 뭐뭐 님바래야 돌아야 초심해봐 소수기 되버주야라 초심해봐 되니지나 초심해봐 되니 이 턴에 저기 삼로 되니 코로나 디 초심 맞아봐 있나 아니 디 강하면 어떻게 자신이가 강한 지고 뒤에서 디바사야 유치모사 거와 되네자 초심된 거 그래서 제산테 시신기 하고 초심된 템베 하고 초심된 두시고 그래서 제산 초심해봐 디원 손들 영어 줘봐가 지금 말해야지 언도시네 송거로 이내 당은 저기 미신라 펜버주야다 개위념는 제와 개와 검제다 개와 사야래 초시지 요 말해지리다 저 소수게 개와 가제사도 디양에 사긴 좀 개와 가제사도네 어다대딩아 개와 사야다가 이민이 검제다 맞으면 지기선 배된 초시지 요 말해 세상 소수게 개위 자와 주야다 지때 초시 지겨 말해서 같이 그 델리아 아니 같이 냠내 제투나 디바사고 말와 개와두야마도.
The antidote to this afflicted way of thinking described in the fourth line is to develop a mind of contentment, a mind that is satisfied with what we have. So think if you perhaps at a meal and there's delicious food and you're getting quite excited by this, maybe you take more than is your share. Or even if you're at a buffet, you can have as much as you want, but watch. This is a mind that lacks contentment, and that is a mind that can never be satiated. It always wants more. It is never satisfied. Rather, what you receive, be happy with that. And if you notice through your vigilance a desire for more arising, recognize that, be like a log and let it go. Be content with what you have. From this, the mind is much calmer, being satisfied with what one receives, not always looking for more, not always being driven by a restlessness of not being satisfied. This is a mind that lacks contentment is that such a mind is in a person who is not content, who is discontent, always wanting more, always dissatisfied, and probably complaining. Where someone has developed contentment, whatever they have, it's sufficient, and they are okay. They're not dominated by these thoughts of constant craving, desiring more. The exception to this is in terms of virtue. So there, one should not be content with just hearing a bit of Dharma or engaging in just occasional meditation. Rather, we should be constantly seeking more. In a balanced way, we should be striving to develop more virtue. Recognizing that through this process of hearing and meditating, we strengthen our habituation to virtuous ways of thinking, to the Dharma. And this is a process we need to go engage in repeatedly over a sustained period. This is what will lead to gradual but eventual radical change of our mind. So there, we shouldn't be easily satisfied saying, I've done enough, before one actually has.
rangi gyun men gyun yue na ya di gyun di mili be beje ne gyun me do do je beje xian gu ta ya ge sam na chyo wa wa de le yo se gore jian gu lu se di xian gu ta se gore lu wa se gu ta se gore wa de yo se gore yu se di rangi yuen de me na ya rangi yuen de yue do do je xian li xin yu do do xian gu ta chyo wa sam no den den yi to ne sam da gu ta de la yu se gore yu se di se gore 여단 유유 염도 자샤도 유유라 그러 진짜 요새에디 랑기 균原来 균디마 현래 배제 현 고거다 삼로들라 요사 다 랑래原的 매나야 랑래原的 阅读 신규阅读 만 니버 阅读 就 되는 阅读 전에 아니 파시엔 고거다 삼로 쇼르와 안딜레 규쇼르 제가 딘디기 현기 유유 제제 현 고거다 제在了 제자라 초야라 소버제 라야된다 라서 직지 딘디기 현 고거다 중으로 딘디기 삼로 예배나 딘디기 삼로 제소 셈데 디제소 마다 잼비기 가서 시신기 딘디 소수규라 유유 삼로 주여바 하고나 시신 하고도 딘네 남사 델리아 잼바 덴제 셈데 디우 초소 마다와지 릉하게 줘봐 가야디 마제바 마셰바지 되고리 해서 제가 유유 삼로 지스다바네 현고다 삼도 되네 nga 준시로 준시 고다 안지마 고다지 준가 준시하다 유유권에 이 답람 직괴 잘라다 가리나 수레 답람 한제의 디용으로 되네서 어디니 전에 시시하고 연도 전부 된제 어두시네 지 아가야 융하게 자와 가야 맞아 되고리 해서
The term deceiving, so what was just said before was the need to develop contentment. This was mainly in relation to being to overcome being cunning or taking advantage. Here, this term deceiving, here this can be expressed in more than one way. It can be expressed as either hiding one's own faults and by hiding one's own faults, making oneself look better than one is. This is deceptive. The opposite is also possible, pretending to have qualities that you do not. So either approach of hiding one's own faults or pretending to have qualities that one does not, these we need to guard ourselves against. This is deceptive behavior, and if expressed, leads to lying, taking advantage of others, and so forth. Again, vigilance notices this in one's mind. Immediately, mindfulness should recall these teachings, recall that this is not the person we want to be. We do not want to take advantage of others. We want to spiritually develop so we can be of benefit to them. So rather than, when such a mind arises, remain like a log. That brings us to the 50th verse. Whenever eager to praise yourself or to insult and belittle others, be verbally abusive and argumentative, at such times rather remain like a log.
lama di nga lia chik gobu chik yue sa da sosugi yuende sosugi tuyanga sosorana lia yuende jue che tuyanga da da goba di tuyanda de garasona sosugi mini mi nyeba raya da nyingu raya da sosugi chik tobya tuyanda la sosolia ane chik gyabgyo raya da di tuyanda la pashi goro ko kungon masona yako chago maro dine kungo tene sosolia tuyanga dame dushin tuyaba lulemba sosoli pe dine ki 베제신 소설이야 뛰어가 땅에 삼로다. 내 현래 몇 봤을 때 현래 거기 요 말에 거기 야보 지금 거기 야보 근데 요 말에 거기 진신의 말에 세드니 현래 균주지 매래 몇 제주와 균주대 제주로 어두신에 삼로 주여버나 제산 소설이 삼로 나려야 랑을 뛰어봐다 현래 매비게 삼로 주고여버나 되네 시신 다지 되네 삼로 예대버나 하거나 염사 잼비게 안디 셈데 디원도 맞다와지 능하게 나게 마와다 내 류기 줘봐 미자와 도시네 신신도 내 오래 사수무도와.
The first line, whenever eager to praise oneself. This is is where one is wanting to talk about one's own excellent qualities, wanting to brag about what one knows, what one's skills one has, and so forth. Perhaps one wants to name drop about the influential people that you know, or the lamas that you have developed a connection with. Or if one wants to engage in the opposite behavior, the second line, to insult and belittle others, to talk about their faults, to criticize them, whichever it may be. We need to be vigilant, on guard against such an afflicted way of thinking. And as soon as it arises, mindfulness needs to remind us, this is not who we want to be. This is not the relationships we want to have with others, where we brag about ourselves or we criticize others, put ourselves up or push others down. This is not who we want to be. I need to refrain from this and ensure that I do not act, that I do not speak.
Anda shiji ge da ji gyu ba se de xie wa se de ge lo ya ji ka dan wa de xie xie da ji go gyun ji da gyun ji xie ba de gyun ji xie xie da ci su de de ne ge xie ba na da de xie wa xie ge ba se de ji dan ge ba se de da ji dan du shi ne pa su ka ha cha ba de le ge ba se go go le ina da de ka de ge ba se de ta ba se jing ba lu ji be ne ya ji de ne ge je le go se ta ba se 탑세데 징바데 간주기 시시에 당 쯧바 겹체 된 투부에 징야를 물어와 되네게 삼로 여바 있나 안 되네게 미 시시에 따야다 탑야게 삼로 두시는 여바네 전 시신 다 시신게 되네게 여바 소수나는 삼로 되네지 시시에 따야게 삼로 코야다 되네게 탑야게 두시 카가 제게 삼로를 주고 회나 안디 안 지게 가소레 되네 안에 잠바 땡제 안에 셈네 디원도 마다와지 가젤레 두스진 자와 마제바 되고를 생각하게 마와 나서바 류기 자와 메제바 되고를 해서 숨으서 다데 대시 신신 네바자 세시게 디다 디 차산이야 자르와다시 자르고.
The third line, I'll just change the translation a bit. Change the first words to blame. So whether one wants to blame or be argumentative. So blaming, when we notice whether we want to blame someone else, whether directly or indirectly, in other words, saying, no, it wasn't me, it was this other person, or if we're blaming someone directly to their face, this is something to refrain from. Again, this is contrary to the ideal that a practitioner holds within. And so too with being argumentative, looking for faults, wanting to pick up faults in what's being said, wanting to quarrel. This way of thinking too is afflicted. And as soon as our vigilance notices it, mindfulness needs to recognize it's an affliction, and this only leads to fault. It's not for me to blame others. It's not for me to look for faults or be argumentative with others. And at such times, rather remain like a log.
나는 두서 가지바지 미니 튜브여바 질이야 파 주신게제 참았어라 그 직질에 현안디데 디디르세 코인 튜브여바디 미튜브여바 있나 다지 개바 즉 튜브여바 미튜브파 야와 개바사지 제가 삼로야 내내기 미튜브여바 질이야 미튜브여게다 될이야 참았어라 내내기 제게 삼로를 줘봐 있나 안디수 삼도 디원도 따네 응하게 잡아지기가 말해서 디원 따바데 나가고 파셔내 결혼 디디도 코디디스도 코트무메아서 기시마 나게 마야다 류기라서바 류기 요하라서바 제디 따네 지가 말해서 신스러.
This term translated as argumentative also carries the connotation of being divisive, so we can maybe translate it as both argumentative or divisive. So where one is wanting to divide people who are harmonious, or keep those who are quarreling, to keep them apart, to side with the one and criticize the other. Here one should refrain when one notices one's mind is going in a divisive direction, to refrain and remain like a log.
공론이야 삼론하라 가르코도 된고 되고 시신게 부도신 잠바 제고를 해서 송도와 지사돈다라 디네스도 소수기 삼론하라야 랑초라 차바나 현초라 당위게 삼로시 계획바나 제산 디 삼로디 람상 전시 된제 삼로디 마가바이나 디 삼로디 부스타샤번 디 유슈체지 친제 소수 류하게 자와된 디초로 조제 되네 아니 지게 류하게 셴리아 뇌비게 디빌리에 사기리스 되네 디바사바네 디제보 디바사바다 마바다 동안 연구하래 사실 제산 되네자 델리아 람상 전바 전시기 전비기 님버때야데 하고 와제다 님버때 투야다 아나 디기 류하게 샘로디 디쇼스 마다와제 류하게 자와 디쇼스 마다와제 바 두신에 마다 네트와 제고래 사실
So this section, including the last verse we looked at last week, and these we look at now and from next week too, are about analyzing our motivation. So analyzing our motivation at all times, being aware of whether our mind is afflicted or not, and through mindfulness and vigilance, ensuring that our speech and our physical behavior never is. And when we notice through vigilance that an affliction has arisen, at the very least, as we saw last week, at the very least, do not act, do not speak. Don't let that affliction be expressed through your physical behavior or your speech. Because in this way, not only do we create stronger negative karma, but our affliction is brought into the lives of others. So at the very least, restrain yourself, refrain from acting under the influence of the afflictions. But ideally, as soon as vigilance notices an affliction, mindfulness should call to mind an antidote and apply the antidote. And in this way, your mind gains release from that affliction, and your mind is once again virtuous.
두신 semna 다른데 가르가르 기계에서 가브릴레 되샤 기계를 라쇼라 차비게 되샤 니 차바다 야 지게 응오발라 소바 체베 차바 야나 현쇼라 당위게 너 콩르게 야라 소바데 용거레스 가브릴레 야지 고바기야게 셈디파 차다게 율파 남이 양 넘버 양지 디초르파 셈 파다와 데네게 남에게 용거레스 네 가브릴레야 데네게 미샤넬이야 직 다가스 게멀롱아체 달고 첼레 잡지고 지 게멀롱야라서 게멀롱아체 두시네 제 삼로딘이 고 용거레스 가브리엘이야 나야기고레 가브리 소수기 가브리엘이야 소수기 인데나 데네 삼다데 인자바게 용거레 지산 아니 가브리엘이야 밀야 미균 바주야다 균제제 데네게 균상 주야데 데네 용거레 야 가브리엘이야 안지기 초시에 매바 직소수 미치 제베나 데는 데레 초시에 매바 망부라야 된다 초심해봐지 디지야다. 이제 초심해봐 차연도 안데니게 토려야 안지 유단 예전에 시행고하다야 되네 삼로 유유게 용거래. 안에 소소한 가브릴리아 소수기 단님고다 야고야데 소소래 뛰어가 소소 야보 인비게 소소래 뛰어가 나야 차 소소래 차지 소소래 뛰어가 나야나 셴리야 아지 마거에 셴리야 백균제제 매균제야 안 잡로리아 시시다 데니기 미툼보여 발라지 미툼보 쇠야라서 데니기 삼로디 또신 아주게 녀모디스 직다 가브레가블다 마라두스 용고레스 제사 데니기 바 그디나도 진 제시신이 파다도 녀모 가르가르 기회 하고 손 남사 데니 하고 요도 젠비게 진도 오다디 젠 지금 말에 선배 섬제디 젠 지금 말에 선배 섬제 젠비 땐님 젠비게 남산 님보 때야지 아니 고 대신 님보 때야다 데니기 님보 가야 땜마도 베네다 그두전에 류하게 줘 디쇼마다 자와 맞제바지 가야 맞제바지 되오래 신나 신체네 되오래 에세스 어다더네 니보디 두신에 간제레 셈디 대소 녀모 보스 따와이나 셈디 녀모 보스 따는데 셈기 토네 네 축체제 줘야 돼 녀모 버게야 녀모 비디 왕게 되네 류하게 줘바디 아니 젠레 네베 자와 디빌레가 자와 지금 되네 디고사고레스 지자스 데네 템베 띠엔체 데레야 님보 계획초도 다 계획섬 다투야디 다투네 야쇼체 데다 다마투베나고 셈데 류하게 자와 디쇼서 마땅하제 도신 되셔바이나 아니 디버사게 말해서 지자 데네 인상아주 디버 모야게 스티버서도 마사에게 탑람데 데네 제고래 사실 다 도신은 도나님부 디레도
in these 3 verses, Shantideva presented a number of afflictions which we have all too much familiarity with. But the approach he guides us in is the same, whatever the affliction is that arises, which is rely on vigilance. And as soon as you notice the arisal of an affliction, then, if you can, apply an antidote. And if you can't, do not act, do not speak. So this then is the meaning of remaining like a log. We think of a large log on the floor of the forest. It's unmoving, it's unaffected by what's going on around it. It remains steady, strong and powerful. This is how our mind should be, not leading when afflictions arise, not leading to speech, not leading to physical behavior, but ideally the application of antidotes. So this is the case where the attachment arises. And attachment, again, arises so easily. It arises in most easily towards our group, whether our loved ones, our friends, or our group, which can revolve around nationality or those of a certain class or view holder, same religion and so forth. Whatever it may be, attachment arises so easily, as well as towards possessions. And then anger arises also, not as easily as attachment, but all too easily. And this can come from things not going our way, someone having a different opinion to us. Anger too arises so easily. So whichever may arise, we should remain like a log, not acting, not speaking, but rather applying an antidote. And so too then in the 49th verse, where he spoke about being overly excited. And this is then arises when one's mind goes back to the object of attachment, thinking about what it is that you desire so again and again, and it dominates your mind. Or being overly excited about an object of anger, thinking about what someone did, thinking about what someone said, and your mind is being dominated, excited in this way. Or when one wants to talk badly about others, mock them, laugh derisively, taking pleasure in the difficulty or the hardships that people we dislike are experiencing. Or wanting to talk badly about someone with a friend that we mutually dislike. We should refrain from this. So too, when we recognize pride or conceit arising, let that go. Do not let it influence us. And when one is wanting to talk about the faults of others, or to be cunning, taking more and more, lacking contentment, or wanting to deceive others, take advantage of others, these include the many afflictions we need to be on guard for. By training our mind in recognizing these as faulty in all instances, we will never allow them to dominate, not seeing them as justified or in certain circumstances appropriate, but rather remaining like a log, not having them influence us. Then in the most recent verse, whenever eager to praise oneself or to insult and belittle others, recognize this too is not appropriate. This does not reflect the person I aspire to be. The person I aspire to be is someone who, when such afflictions arise, remains like a log and doesn't act under their influence. And likewise, with blaming others or being divisive, keeping people, playing your part and keeping others apart, or breaking relationships. This is not appropriate. These two we need to refrain from.
차바 많이 봐줘 소수기다 뭐니 소수기 여바 있나 연데 어디딩이 도수 신기여 사지 마디니디 여 사지 오다 남아지자능이 이제 원로 맹아당의 연데 데네스네 장화 인딩이 도수 제네 마디 아시 초고로와 소수기 연데 여바디 신리야 판도 여바다 표절이야 아니 삼로야 녀모바 기메바 지레나 데네게 그 시초고로 송고로와 디나시 Shen me ba se Shen ya ma ke we ko le gyun jik ma ke we ton ko le ya ne yong ne bi don da ya gyun ji jin na ji ma wa da im Shen me se di wa. Na ji da na ya Shen le gyun jin ne jue chu ma de be la na dan jue chu ba je yong gu ro be ne so su gi 这个罗马所说的现呢，研究包括了判断也把钱呢，可能点拿出去多点钱的提高嘛，可能点拿出去算是可能让这些可以啊，你可以的所说我的决些吧的，你点把的是一起些，忙把那的那个经验是别个都是呢，有啊当初那个在县里啊，判别身边过年那些，你可以啊。 判断越把当可以连接，如果当一个对吧越把家伙呢，俺就叫人的先这个嘛，就听到这些多是现在这个的，俺让人判别什么姑娘来着，怕说可以没来呢，现在要这个嘛，怕说的看着垃圾要他来了，现在的这个变得先给让给怕判别什么可能注意把怕苏边的判别什么姑娘那怕说的呀判断越把那啊对的那个根据来的。 有军的那点多点几个马罗森，那现在写过罗，现在这个罗的，在先没有写的。
Say just a little more about the first two lines in the 50th verse. Whenever eager to praise yourself. What I said earlier, I think, is quite clear. We should be on guard about praising ourselves, talking about our good qualities, all that we've achieved and done. There very often is no purpose for this. But there are occasions when it is good to do so. This requires two points, or has two aspects. One being a motivation to benefit. So, for example, if you know someone is embarking on a particular practice, and you have knowledge and experience in that practice, you can say to them you have, and you can offer some advice. So this is one quality. You have a motivation to bring benefit. It's not about you wanting to show off, oh, yes, I've mastered this already, or I've been training this for a while. You need to be very clear with yourself about your motivation. And the second is that you need to be entirely honest. So if you have qualities, talk about them. Do not exaggerate them. Do not allow there to be a possible misunderstanding of just how qualified you are. Be honest and make sure your motivation is genuinely to benefit and not about puffing oneself up or making oneself look good in their eyes. Then you talk further about the second line, or to insult and belittle others. So there are times when one does need to point out someone's faults to them. So when this is most clear is between a teacher and a student. But in your own lives, there'll be other relationships where you may well be required that you point out the faults of others. But when you do so, what you say needs to be correct. You need to have your facts straight. But one of the most important points within the decision of whether to say something or not, again, whether it's a teacher-student relationship or another relationship, is you first need to ask yourself, is this person going to be receptive to what I have to say? Because you may well have a good motivation of wanting to benefit them, but all too often, unsolicited advice is not well received. It may annoy the other person, it may cause separation. And you know from your own lived experience how much advice is given and how little of it is ever taken up. So therefore, think carefully before giving unsolicited advice. Ask yourself, is this person going to be receptive to what I have to say? And if you're comfortable that there will be, then say something. Otherwise, it's best not to say anything, because the only outcome will be is your relationship with them will be a little damaged. Okay, then thank you. We'll conclude there tonight. Thank you.